It's safe to say that not many smartphone makers build smartphones the way that Sony does. It's loaded the phones with old school practicality and given it some really cool camera capabilities that you won't find anywhere else. So how does its latest Xperia flagship compare to what many class as the de facto premium phone, the iPhone 16 Pro? And is there a benefit to choosing Sony's Xperia 1 Mark VI over the iPhone? I'm Cam Bunton, this is Trusted Reviews, and in this video I'll tell you. You start to see the different take on smartphones from Sony even in the most basic ways, just looking at the design and the build, because although both of these are metal and glass rectangles, that's about where the similarity ends. Where iPhone has smooth frosted glass on the back and titanium on the edges, Sony went all in on texture. So you'll find raised dimples on the back and slim grooved channels up the sides, giving it a sense of grip. I'm not saying it's impossible to drop, but it's easier to keep hold of than iPhone's smooth finish. Size-wise, it sits in a weird position between the iPhone 16 Pro and the 16 Pro Max. It's taller than the 16 Pro because of the bezels at the top and the bottom of the display, but its width is about halfway between the two Pro Apple smartphones, primarily because its display sits about halfway between them in size too. The result is a phone that's big, but doesn't feel overly wide or uncomfortable to hold, thanks to the fact that it's also lighter than both of Apple's premium smartphones. Now, I mentioned Sony's old-school practicality at the beginning of this video, and you start to see more evidence of that when you look around the edges of the phone. You'll find a 3.5mm port for wired audio in the top edge, a SIM tray in the bottom edge that you can remove without the need for a pin or an ejector tool, and a physical fingerprint sensor on the side built into the power button. That SIM tray also has a space for a microSD card, so you can actually expand the storage of the phone if you want to as well. And while Apple did introduce a new camera control button on the iPhone, it's not as conveniently placed or as simple to use as the Sony camera shutter button. It might not be able to do as much as Apple's, which is touch sensitive and can be swiped and used for much more than just taking a photo, but when you want to quickly just launch the camera and snap a picture, I found the Sony implementation a lot more convenient. The only downside of Sony's build is that it doesn't feel particularly strong. Give it a twist and you'll feel a bit of a bend, and you'll also hear some creaking. The iPhone just feels much sturdier and more solid in that regard. Both do have similar levels of water resistance, offering protection and IP68 levels. Apple has tested its phone to deeper depths, but for daily spills and accidental drops in the bath and the sink, both will survive just fine. Now, as I mentioned, when it comes to displays, the Sony sits somewhere between the 16 Pro and the 16 Pro Max with its 6.5-inch panel. Apple's measure 6.3 and 6.9 inch respectively. This, along with the fact that it's got a slightly lower resolution, means the iPhone has a slightly sharper, more pixel-dense display. But it has to be said, both of these displays are good. Both very capable 120Hz panels that can hit high brightness levels. What surprised me was that when I cranked the brightness all the way up to full, the Sony was noticeably brighter across the whole panel than the iPhone's was. The other strength in Sony's favour is that there are options within the display settings where you can tweak the colour to really granular levels to make it look exactly the way that you want, and a number of different settings to enable and disable too. For instance, creator mode can be enabled, which gives the entire experience a more muted, pale look. With this enabled, it does mean that there are scenes lacking in vibrant colours and saturation, or lacking that sense of richness. Where in standard mode, colours get really saturated and details tend to get a bit over sharpened to make things look a little bit less authentic. Because it also toggles on a video enhancement feature at the same time. Again, you can toggle that video enhancement feature on or off, but what I found was that the iPhone struck a better balance between that natural and the vibrant look by default. But then you don't really get to tweak that setting all that much at all. You can change the brightness, toggle on the True Tone mode, but that's about it. It was perhaps a bit too warm at times, but on the whole it hit that Goldilocks zone of being attractive but not over the top and without being too muted and dull. Now, switching to speak performance, and in benchmarking tests, the iPhone will outperform and outscore the Sony in most instances. In real daily life though, using it day to day, there's not something you'll notice all that much, because both phones are quick. And because it has the latest Snapdragon processor, Sony's is about as powerful as it comes in the Android world. Neither struggles with even the highest quality games unless you push them beyond 15 or 20 minutes at a time in their ultra settings. The only time I really noticed any heating up was when running an extreme stress test in a benchmarking app, but otherwise they're both efficient and fast, to the point where I don't think this is an area worth basing any purchase decision on. Now, as for battery life, I don't think I've had an Android phone ever that lasts as long on a full charge as the Sony. The company calls it a 2-day battery, and for me, it's easily a 2-day battery. My own personal use is quite light to moderate, so it meets that promise quite easily. A few times during testing it even made it through the morning of a third day. Of course, this smaller iPhone 16 Pro can't do that. I couldn't get it to the end of a second day at all, even with my own light usage, which is usually about 2 or 3 hours of casual usage, mixed between social media, YouTube, gaming, camera and web browsing. However, if battery life is a concern for you, there is the 16 Pro Max, which has a much bigger battery and can closely match what the Sony can offer, but it is a really big phone. But let's talk about the important stuff. The cameras, because Sony's system has one of my favorite features in a modern smartphone. So yes, while it has a similar triple camera makeup with a primary, ultra-wide and zoom like the iPhone does, that zoom camera is actually quite special. It has a continuous optical zoom between 3.5 times and 7.1 times, making it act more like an actual zoom lens, where the iPhone's optical zoom equivalent is locked to 5 times, meaning anything beyond or beneath that uses digital cropping of some kind. But Sony's also enables a telephoto macro mode, which, if you have the patience and time, is fantastic for taking up close-up shots of really small objects like ants, textures in fabric, leaves and so on. The process is a bit slow and manual because you need to use a manual focus slider on the screen and keep your hands really still, but with a focus peaking highlighting feature you can easily make sure that what you want to be in focus is in focus. Now iPhone's is still good for macro in that you can just get it up close to a subject, enable macro mode, tap and shoot. It's certainly quicker doing it that way, but with Sony's there's that feeling of more versatility, especially if you have the patience to do it. Otherwise, there were a couple of things I spotted when testing the cameras in different scenes to see how they coped and how they processed colours and images. One thing that kept cropping up for Sony was that it doesn't tend to tame the bright spots or the highlights in images as aggressively as the iPhone does. Whether indoors or out, where there was a bright overexposed part of an image, it lost all of its texture and detail in the Sony shots because it gets blown out. iPhone's more heavy-handed HDR and processing meant those were taken care of more consistently well, automatically, unless I was shooting landscapes with lots of greenery. But the weird thing I found, however, was that in these scenes, a lot of the time, Sony's pictures had a weird, hazy, soft look, almost like looking at parts of the image through frosted glass. Elements like grass in the fields and backgrounds, and some of the texture was completely lost a lot of the time. There is a little bit of a caveat here. If you set its exposure based on the brightest part of the image, it tones the whole thing down and can deliver great looking shots with rich color and detail. It just means a generally darker image overall, and having to think about it a little more than if you were to use the iPhone. So for selfies, pictures of buildings and people, its lack of over-sharpening and over-processing also meant those things tended to look a lot more lifelike and natural. Now when it comes to night mode, Sony did improve things from its older smartphones this year by adding an automatic night mode, but compared to any other phone, and including this iPhone, it's still pretty bad. Using the main camera, it can draw in light and do an okay job at evening out hand shakiness, but the images come out looking soft and grainy compared to the iPhone's results, which were brighter, sharper, and featured richer colours. Switch to the ultra-wide or the zoom cameras and things get even worse. They don't capture anywhere near as much light, with pictures often looking really dark. iPhone's only real weakness against the Sony in night mode is that the 2x digital zoom can never focus, but that's about it. If you want good low light photography from the Sony, you'll need a tripod, some patience, kick it into the manual pro mode to adjust the exposure and shutter speed yourself. Now both phones are pretty good video creation tools for those looking for more pro level abilities, because you can shoot 4K up to 120 frames per second, so you can have some super crispy slow-mo action. Both capable of producing footage that I'd be happy to use in my videos as an extra bit of B-roll. The only issue with Sony being that, again, it makes it a little bit harder to get it. Not for any other reason than I found it often didn't respond quickly and reliably to touchscreen prompts, like when trying to switch cameras for zooming. In the end, it was easier to switch the volume buttons into zoom buttons in the camera and zoom with those. Essentially, Sony just likes to make you work for things, but if you have the patience and the ability, or you're happy to learn, you might be surprised at how good it can be. Now in the end, in most areas, the Sony or iPhone conundrum can be boiled down to whether or not you want to tweak things and work on making them the way you want them to be, or whether you want things to be convenient and easy. iPhone's display out of the box looks better in most instances, and the camera system is quick, easy and painless. For most people, and for the fact the build is more durable and the phone is slightly cheaper, the iPhone does make the better choice. However, if you like the practicalities the Sony has to offer, like the headphone port, the SD card, physical camera button that's actually a button, and the results from the camera, and especially for the telemacro mode, the Sony is an alternative that offers something a little bit different. It also has got by far the better battery life of these two phones. It is expensive though, and you're only guaranteed 3 years of major software updates, so that is worth bearing in mind. Let me know what you think of these two phones in the comments down below, or you can grab me on social media. I'm at Cam Bunton. If you did like this video, please do leave a thumbs up, subscribe and tap that notification bell, and I'll see you again in the next one. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.